In the Black Rose McQueen, I wanted to give a shout out to Ring IQ Boxing, and remember to tune in to the motherfucking relay.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Billy Joe Saunders took to Twitter and left a comment that reads, "Another one just wanting to make money off bullshit stories on an innocent man, innocent until proven guilty. A case against somebody for 20 years. It's absolutely ridiculous. We have thousands of people dying of COVID, and they talk about this bullshit." He's referencing a recent expose in reference to his old buddy, boxing's favorite mystery man, Daniel Kinahan, and what is his increasingly high profile.
You won't leave that fucking guy alone.
Billy went on to say, "Please, can all the Irish media stop harassing me on my private phone? I'm going from my own personal problems, and I am getting hounded day by day. Please, just leave me alone. I have no story for anybody, innocent until proven guilty, as the law states, so please, just leave me alone!" You know, we've broached the subject of Daniel Kinahan's sketchy past here on the channel, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. In light of the expose recently done on Daniel Kinahan, what you have to understand is
You need proof.
this is all conjecture at this point. You can use your own common sense. You can use your own better judgment as to why the Irish media is so vigorously pursuing Daniel Kinahan in what seems to be an attempt to expose him. Expose him for what he really is and bring him to justice.
You can connect the dots.
Most anyone can. But in order to try and convict an individual one such as Daniel Kinahan, it's going to take more than just connecting the dots and the conjecture that ensues. It's going to take
Evidence.
hard evidence, concrete evidence, proof
Actual proof.
that substantiates these claims being levied against him. That's what it's going to take, and anything less than that.
You're pissing in the wind, buddy.
It was reported that Daniel Kinahan has since relocated to Dubai as of 2016. He's no longer even based out of Ireland. In many ways, it feels like Daniel has so escaped the clutches of what individuals in Ireland seek to bring him to justice, to expose him for what he really is. Because guess what? He's not in Ireland anymore. He's in Dubai.
Your reach exceeds your grasp.
Listen, it's simple. It's going to take more than conjecture to try and convict someone. And when it comes to Daniel, that's all there is. Conjecture, hearsay.
The fighters seem happy.
You won't hear the fighters say a negative word about young Daniel Kinahan. You won't hear them
Complaining.
portraying him as this malignant entity in the sport of boxing. Quite the opposite. They sing his praises. And they sing the praises of MTK Global. The story's supposed to be that Daniel has since parted ways with MTK, and he's distancing himself from the sport of boxing, though no one actually believes this.
And that's besides the point.
If you can't prove in a court of law that Daniel Kinahan is, in fact, a criminal, the leader of a massive drug cartel, if you can't prove this, then all you're actually doing is slandering him. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's slander.
I'm not telling you that I think Daniel Kinahan is innocent or guilty. I'm telling you that in the absence of concrete evidence, in the absence of corroborating evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Daniel Kinahan is every inch the criminal he's portrayed to be by the Irish media, I'm telling you that in the absence of that evidence, this is little more than just conjecture. And this consistent kind of conjecture coming from the Irish media borders on slander. On one end, you might say that people over there in Ireland turned up the heat on Daniel Kinahan, so much so that in 2016 he decided to relocate to Dubai. That's one way to look at it. But yet another way to look at it is perhaps he decided to so leave Ireland because his image, his public image,
Being attacked.
the way he's being portrayed, he's being openly slandered in the absence of concrete evidence. In that situation, he may have felt that he had no choice but to go live somewhere else, somewhere where he won't be constantly attacked, where he won't be subject to the persecution that he receives from the Irish journos.
Do I think he's innocent?
No, not for a second. But in the absence of corroborating evidence, this is little more than just a witch hunt.
They could get you anywhere.
And reaching out to Daniel's affiliates, friends, if you will, friends like Billy Joe Saunders, to get their take on how Daniel is being portrayed is a vain attempt to continue this slanderous campaign against a man you have no evidence against.
You got nothing.
I can tell you that Daniel never did anything to me. I never saw him hurt anyone.
Did you?
The law states that a man is innocent until he is, in fact, proven guilty.
A man?
That's the problem. They haven't proven Daniel's done any of the stuff they're saying he's involved with.
How do you guys know he hasn't gone straight?
Perhaps the ill-gotten gains that the Irish media is always reporting on in reference to Daniel, perhaps that is what he used as a startup to get his legitimate business affairs off the ground. And these days, he's on the straight and narrow.
But perhaps Daniel's days of racketeering, larceny, shootout, streets of Ireland, perhaps those days are behind him.
I mean, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know that the Irish media isn't reporting on what is, here today, outdated information in reference to dealings that
Dealt with.
Daniel Kinahan is no longer dealing with? I mean, how do you know? Hypothetically speaking, if Daniel Kinahan is every inch the criminal entity, the criminal mastermind that the Irish media portrays him to be, that would effectively allow him to start up a business, a legitimate business, with more startup money than the average small business owner. Perhaps he's gone straight. Perhaps he's balls deep in the sport of boxing at this point, and maybe he's not who they say he is, at least not anymore. Maybe that's who he was, but that ain't who he is.
That's possible.
And that might explain Daniel's 2016 decision to take his business elsewhere. Relocate to Dubai, where he won't be subject to the slanderous accusations constantly being levied against him from the Irish media. That's one way to look at it. Yet another way to look at it is, maybe Daniel is exactly who they say he is. Maybe he is. But in the absence of concrete evidence, you're pissing in the wind. It's going to take more than conjecture to convict a man of being a criminal, let alone the criminal mastermind, the criminal entity, the malignant persona that Daniel Kinahan is described as being by the Irish media. Ultimately, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove in a court of law. Moving on. There appear to be preliminary rumblings, rumors, about a potential matchup between Javonte Davis, the WBA's super featherweight champion, and Abner. That's right. It appears that proposition is being revisited, at least in some circles. These rumors are unconfirmed rumors, you understand. We don't know with any certainty that this is the next guy that Javonte Davis is going to be fighting. But what these rumors do address is the very real question as far as who Javonte Davis is going to be facing next. Because the PBC ain't got very many ponies in that super featherweight show.
They don't.
They don't have very many ponies in that lightweight show either. I know that a lot of people out there like to think of Javonte Davis as being a part of that Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia conversation, that Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia situation. But the reality of it is, all those guys are with different promotional outfits. There are political boundary lines that affect what fights happen, and
None of those guys are going to be next.
I don't know that Javonte Davis will ever lock horns with those aforementioned three fighters. I don't know that he ever will. But what I am certain of, what I'm sure of, is that neither one of those three guys is going to be his very next opponent. Neither one of those three guys is going to be his very next fight. I used to think that what the PBC was going to do after the Leo Santa Cruz fight is feed Javonte Davis yet another little guy moving up in Gary Russell Jr., as Gary Russell Jr. had already expressed some enthusiasm, some willingness to move up and take on Javonte Davis. And I thought that's what was going to happen. But given some recent events, the PBC making an offer to Kid Galahad, who very soon is going to be competing for the newly vacated IBF title. What that offer they made to Kid Galahad communicates to me is that the PBC might be shifting their focus and paying special attention to the featherweight division. The featherweight division where they already have two active reigning champions in Leo Santa Cruz, if you can believe that.
He hasn't campaigned as a featherweight in 2 years.
But he still holds a belt there, WBA title. They have Leo Santa Cruz at 126 pounds, and they have Gary Russell Jr., WBC champion, also at 126 pounds. If Kid Galahad manages to pick up that vacant IBF title, and he takes the PBC up on their deal, that will give the PBC 3 of the 4 world champions at this weight.
They could stage a round robin between the 3 of them.
Like what they're already doing at 175 pounds with Badu Jack, Jean Pascal, and Marcus Brown.
If they do this,
If that is the way the cookie crumbles for the PBC's guys at 126 pounds, the question then becomes, where does that leave Javonte?
Where?
Who does he fight? Perhaps this is why there are widespread rumors and speculation that Abner Mares could very well be Javonte Davis's next opponent. That could be his next fight. God knows, this is something they intended to stage before.
Over a year ago.
Did you guys forget? They were talking about making an Abner Mares versus Javonte Davis fight. But, something happened to Abner's eye. He got decommissioned for a while. He hasn't actually had a fight in 3 years.
He hasn't fought since 2018.
June of 2018, when he took on Leo Santa Cruz in the second installment of their saga, in a rematch that he lost. That's right. Abner Mares is a guy coming off a loss at 126 pounds who hasn't fought in 3 years. And if you're hearing this and telling yourself that this can't possibly be the guy that they might put in there with Javonte Davis, you might want to consider Jesus Cuellar. Jesus Cuellar was coming off a loss to Abner Mares in 2 years of inactivity.
When they put him in there with Javonte,
they let Javonte Davis fight that fucking guy under those circumstances for the WBA super title at 130 pounds. The title that should have gone to Alberto Machado, but for some reason was made available to Javonte Davis.
you remember.
That's another story.
For another day.
The idea here is that having Javonte Davis face a featherweight at super featherweight, having him face a featherweight that's coming off a loss and over a year of inactivity, well, that's right up the PBC's alley. They've done that before.
They might do it again.
They might do it because they just ain't got that many ponies in the show at 130 pounds or 135. They will effectively sabotage any talks with a Teofimo Lopez, any talks with a Devin Haney preemptively by asserting Javonte Davis's quote-unquote A-side status.
They always do.
I mean, that pretty much kills negotiations before they even begin. Comes to Ryan Garcia. I view a Ryan Garcia fight as a more feasible fight, a more realistic fight, a more realistic proposition for Javonte Davis than the aforementioned two guys. But who the fuck knows what Ryan Garcia is going to be doing next, as these Pacquiao rumors and rumblings are ongoing. A lot of people are accusing Ryan Garcia of clout-chasing Manny Pacquiao by entertaining that proposition openly, publicly, via social media. They're accusing Ryan of clout-chasing Manny, but it's Manny's own manager, Sean Gibbons, that is adding fuel to that fire based on his Instagram uploads.
You tell me why Sean is posting this shit.
You tell me why Sean Gibbons has 2 uploads uploaded to his Instagram account right now that indicate they're working on that fight.
The bottom line is Ryan ain't fighting Javonte next.
Perhaps that's why all these talks of a Davis versus Mares fight have resurfaced. Perhaps that's where those rumors are coming from, because at minimum we know Devin Haney ain't next and Teofimo ain't next. Doesn't look like Ryan's going to be next either, but Javonte Davis does need someone to fight. I'd tell you that an Abner Mares fight is far too big of a frivolity, far too much of a frivolous gimme fight for Javonte Davis at this stage, but he's made a career out of participating in gimme fights.
This is no more frivolous than the Cuellar and Gamboa fights were.
The PBC and the people over there at Mayweather Promotions were willing to stage those shit shows, then this one's right up their alley.
This ain't nothing new to them.
And finally, per tweet from Mike Kopinger, Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders is slated for May 8th on DAZN. Cinco de Mayo is on a Wednesday, so May 1st was a possibility. The Josh Taylor-Jose Ramirez undisputed title tilt is also on May 8th on ESPN. Absolute disaster for boxing to have 2 fights of that magnitude head-to-head. And I don't think that Mike is off base here. I think there is some truth to what he's saying, that you shouldn't really have to divide your time, divide your attention when it comes to 2 matchups of that scale, of that size, given what's on the line in both fights. I understand that neither Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez have the kind of marquee value that a Canelo Alvarez does. I get that. But that's a very important fight between them. That's an undisputed 140-pound title fight that promises to be a real slobber knocker, as neither Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez are safety-first fighters. You put those 2 guys in the same ring with each other, you're going to get a Fight of the Year candidate. At the same time,
Canelo's fight is a unification match
that brings Canelo Alvarez, the face of boxing in this part of the world, one step closer to becoming an undisputed champion himself. Anecdotally, I want to say that if I had to choose between watching those 2 fights, it's a tough choice. It really is.
Shouldn't have to choose.
But I think the Ramirez versus Taylor fight is actually the more intriguing fight because it's the more even matchup. There really isn't much chance of Billy Joe Saunders knocking Canelo Alvarez out. I mean, if Gennady Golovkin couldn't do it in 2 fights...
2 times.
I don't think Billy can. It is safe to say that Gennady Golovkin is a much bigger, more destructive puncher than Billy Joe Saunders ever was in 2 weight classes. That being said, if Gennady Golovkin didn't knock Canelo Alvarez out in 24 rounds that they fought. I doubt that Billy Joe Saunders can do it at 168. Billy couldn't put away Martin Murray in his last outing. Billy is a skillful boxer, a crafty southpaw, make no mistake. He's a quality operator. But what he ain't is a knockout artist. And if Billy can't knock Canelo Alvarez out, what kind of chances do you give him to beat Canelo on the cards?
The cards Canelo Alvarez has always had a way with.
That being said, it's not my intention to diminish the value of the Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders fight. It still is a very high-quality fight involving 3 of the 4 major titles in the super middleweight division. It's just that that fight doesn't have the air of spontaneity. It's not quite the same even matchup that the Taylor versus Ramirez fight is. That if I had to choose between watching those 2 fights, I think I have a greater chance of seeing something unexpected in Taylor versus Ramirez as opposed to Canelo versus Saunders. Because Canelo versus Saunders is a question of, do you think that Billy can win on points? Because there ain't much chance of him knocking Canelo Alvarez out.
It's a small dilemma.
And I say it's a small dilemma because these days, the average household has some kind of a tablet, a laptop, or a desktop that would enable the boxing fan to view both fights at the same time, simultaneously. The average household these days has a tablet, a laptop, or a desktop in unison with a smart TV where you can watch network broadcasts.
All right.
And, this kind of a setup is almost everywhere you go these days. So
It's not a big deal.
I'd wager that the average boxing fan is fully capable of watching both of these cards at the same time. Here at Ring IQ headquarters, I could watch upwards of 4 to 5 cards at the same time, given the setup that I've got. That being said, I'd wager the average American boxing fan, has multiple mediums of watching a boxing matches on several platforms simultaneously. I don't think it's
It's not as big a disaster as Mike lets on.
And if worse comes to worse,
If it does,
adjustments can be made.
maybe you have one of those cards come on earlier than the other.
And if you have to, you change the date. You gotta remember, Javonte Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz was supposed to happen the same day of a big UFC card, but they ended up moving it. I think reasonable accommodations can be made so that these 2 cards don't have to compete for viewership.
They are being marketed to the same demographic of fight fans.
But like I said before, if nothing changes, if the situation remains the same, I happen to think the average American household can accommodate this situation, as the average American household has tablets and laptops and desktops, multiple TVs, all sorts of ways to watch 2 separate fights happening at the same time. It's entirely manageable.